I remember the exact moment the email landed in my inbox. It was titled, Strategic Cost Optimization, Immediate Measures. I'm Clayton Ward. I ran this company's entire compliance program for over 12 years. Not a consultant. Not some temp who rotated in and out. I built the system they use to survive every audit and keep their licenses current. I wrote the SOPs, negotiated the remediations, trained their managers to stop cutting corners that could kill people or shut us down. That subject line told me everything I needed to know before I even opened it. Corporate never says, "We're firing you." They say, optimization. They say realignment. They say, efficiency. When I opened the email, it was the same corporate gibberish I'd seen kill a dozen safety programs before. Immediate elimination of redundant non-revenue roles. Investment in automation and outsourcing to streamline compliance processes. Redundant. That was me. I scrolled through the attached transition plan. It was laughable. A PDF made by a consultancy that had probably never seen an OSHA inspection up close. Bullet points about digital audit readiness solutions and workflow standardization, with no mention of our site, specific variances, or past incident history. They didn't understand that our regulatory exemptions weren't one-size-fits-all. They were negotiated, documented, and recertified because of the paper trail I maintained like it was a holy text. But of course that's expensive. That's what always kills safety and compliance first. They think it's a cost, not protection. 2 hours later, Gary called me into the conference room. Gary was my boss on paper. More accurately, he was the kind of manager who saw compliance as Clayton's problem, until it cost money. He couldn't even look me in the eye. "Clayton," he started, voice dry. "The executive team has decided to pursue a more modern compliance strategy. Your role will be reduced effective immediately." I waited. No yelling. No protest. Just let the silence hang, until he squirmed. The HR rep was there too. Clipboard ready, watching liability exposure in real time. "We'll be using a software vendor," Gary continued. "They'll take over record-keeping and certification management. It's, very cost-effective. You believe it will handle our OSHA Clause 1910.119 process safety certification?" I asked. Gary glanced at HR. "Their proposal assures us." "Assures you," I said flatly. I flipped open the manila folder I'd brought. My personal copy of our signed internal compliance binder. I kept it updated after every meeting, every audit recommendation, every damn time an inspector flagged even a typo. I laid it on the table. "You understand this isn't just records. It's a living system of controls that meets the regulator's requirements. This is what they certify." Gary wouldn't touch it. HR cleared her throat. "We're confident the transition plan will maintain regulatory readiness," she recited. I stared at them both. "And Clause 14. B in this termination document waives any claim for constructive dismissal or regulatory retaliation, correct?" They froze. I'd read the whole damn separation packet already. Corporate always buries the real danger in the fine print. Sign away any leverage. Get out cheap. HR blinked and nodded. Standard legal language. "Right," I said. I didn't sign it. I closed the folder slowly. "I'll review this at home before signing." "I have 72 hours, yes?" HR nodded too quickly. Gary exhaled. He actually looked relieved, like this hadn't turned into a scene. No one wants the guy who knows the rules to fight back. They just want him to go quietly. On the way out of the room, I paused at the whiteboard in the planning area. My handwriting was all over it. Upcoming audit deadlines, contractor recertification schedules, the remediation log for the surprise OSHA visit last quarter. No one erased it yet, probably because no one knew what half of it even meant. I didn't say goodbye. Nobody made eye contact. Not because they hated me, because they were afraid of being next. If you've ever had someone call you overhead while knowing you're the reason they keep the doors open, you understand why I'm telling this story. Hit that subscribe button if you know what it's like to be the insurance policy they don't want to pay for. Because the thing about compliance is, you don't notice you needed it until it's gone. When I got home that afternoon, I didn't go straight to the fridge or the television. I set the manila folder down on my kitchen table, opened it, laid every page out carefully. This was the termination packet they'd so politely handed me, complete with legal disclaimers in 10-point font and the usual HR language meant to sound empathetic, while stripping you of any leverage. We appreciate your contributions. Your role is no longer aligned with our strategic goals. We encourage you to review the transition support options available. It was corporate speak designed to wash their hands of me. I picked up my personal compliance binder next. It was worn at the edges, tabs color-coded, annotations everywhere, years of OSHA citation notes, prior settlement letters, internal root cause analyses they pretended never happened once they were closed. I flipped to a page marked in red, Clause 1910.119. Process Safety Management. That clause had saved them over $1 million in potential fines when we discovered a hazardous material storage issue. Because I'd caught it early. Because I knew what questions to ask. Because I didn't trust the contractor's self-reported logs. But none of that was in their transition PDF. That document promised automated audit readiness. It didn't mention that the software required humans to feed it accurate data. Garbage in, garbage out. I knew exactly what was going to happen. At the bottom of the HR packet was the indemnity waiver. Clause 14. B in bold. Small print beneath it. Employee acknowledges that this termination is not retaliatory in nature and waives all claims related to regulatory compliance reporting or safety violations. That was the insurance policy for them. If I signed, I couldn't turn around and tell OSHA or the state regulator, "Hey, they fired me to cover up non-compliance." It was cheap protection. I felt this slow, cold anger settle in my chest. Not rage, not shouting, just the hard knowledge that they knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't stupid. They were cynical. They believed they could swap out 12 years of institutional knowledge for a $99 a month SaaS subscription and a waiver in my exit paperwork. That was the real insult. Not that they wanted me gone, that they thought I was too dumb to see it. I sat back, stared at my kitchen ceiling. It's funny how quiet it gets when you realize you don't have to protect them anymore. I'd spent years shielding them from themselves, documenting every deviation, training managers who ignored me until the inspector knocked, cleaning up near misses that would have killed someone if they'd been worse. But I wasn't paid to be the moral compass. I was paid to make sure the company didn't get shut down. They just decided they didn't need that anymore. I opened my laptop, typed out a short email. Gary, HR, per policy, I'm reviewing the separation agreement. Please confirm 72-hour review window applies. No signature yet. Clayton. I didn't CC anyone else. Didn't threaten. Didn't rant. I wanted a paper trail that I was being professional. Then I opened another document. My personal notes. Not the company binder, but the encrypted file I kept for myself. Not proprietary data. Just my own observations. Manager training gaps. Last minute contract approvals. Les flakes ignore. Vendors with expired indemnity certificates. Equipment maintenance delays. None of this was company IP. Just my memory. My experience. They couldn't delete that. I looked at the HR packet again, at the clause that said I couldn't call OSHA. But it didn't say I couldn't decline to help them if they called me back. Didn't say I had to fix it for them for free. Didn't say I had to answer if they panicked after the next failed audit. I closed the folder slowly, stacked it neatly. No rush to sign. No reason to argue. Let them feel safe. They thought they'd gotten rid of a cost center. What they'd really done was cut out the last line of defense between them and the state regulator. That thought made me smile, just a little. Not because I wanted them to fail, because I knew they would, all by themselves. If you've ever watched someone call safety a waste of budget while relying on you to keep them compliant, you know exactly why I didn't fight them that day. I just let them think they'd won. I didn't bother sleeping much that night. You'd think getting fired would make you want to drink yourself into oblivion. I didn't. I sat at my table until after midnight, reading every line of the HR packet they'd given me. They wanted me gone, but they wanted it clean. No lawsuit. No regulatory complaint. No future whistleblowing. I highlighted Clause 14. B 3 times. Employee acknowledges this separation is not due to retaliation for regulatory compliance reporting. That was the entire strategy. Delete the human who knows how the system actually works. Replace it with cheap software. Make sure he can't say anything about why he's gone. It was corporate risk management in action. I had to admire the legal department's work. They'd covered every angle except one. They couldn't delete my memory. At 7:02 a.m. the next morning, my phone buzzed with an email from HR. Clayton, confirming you have 72 hours to review and sign. Let us know if you have any questions. I replied in exactly one sentence. Acknowledged receipt. Reviewing. No emotion. No threats. Just a record. I was an insider. I knew how they'd spin it internally. He was treated fairly. He didn't even contest it. The separation was amicable. And for them, that was enough. HR loves checklists. They don't care if you're actually okay. They care that they can prove you didn't fight. I didn't plan to fight. That was the real trick. I didn't have to. Before lunch, I got another email. This time from Gary. Clayton, when convenient, can you send over any in-progress notes on the vendor indemnity renewals? We want to ensure nothing slips through as we transition. I read it twice before laughing. Gary was always the type who couldn't manage his own department without leaning on mine. Now he was realizing he didn't know what half those processes even were. I drafted my reply carefully. Gary, as I no longer have access to company systems, I can't validate anything further. As discussed, my role is being eliminated immediately per the transition plan. Please refer to the vendor SOP on SharePoint. Send. Simple. Polite. Useless. Because I knew the vendor SOP on SharePoint hadn't been updated in over a year. I was the one who kept the real process current. The one who called suppliers at 7 p.m. to get fresh indemnity certificates before an audit. The one who flagged contract language that wouldn't hold up to OSHA scrutiny. They had wanted me gone because they didn't like that I owned those details. Now they were realizing they'd fired the only person who could find them. After lunch, I opened my binder again. Not the company's copy. My personal one. I paged to the section marked red flags. Contractor B. Missing 2024 indemnity proof. Chemical storage variance renewal pending. Maintenance backlog on process line 3. Employee training records incomplete. New OSHA rules Q1. None of that was company confidential data. Just my own risk log. Just what I knew. And they had no idea how much of this lived only in my head. I stared at the list. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something colder. Because they didn't just fire me. They made the choice to fire the part of the system that remembered why the system existed. You can automate forms. You can outsource signatures. But you can't outsource knowing where the bodies are buried. At 3:17 p.m., another email. HR reminder. Separation agreement due in 48 hours to ensure smooth processing. Smooth. They loved that word. I left it unread for the moment. Instead, I drafted another email but didn't send it. OSHA. Region 7. Office question about process safety management. Variance reviews and contractor indemnity requirements. I stared at it for a long time, my thumb hovering over send, but I didn't. Not yet, because I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed to step back and let them operate without me. That was the worst part for them. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't even going to warn them. I was just going to watch. If you've ever held your tongue because you knew your silence was the loudest warning you could give. Yeah. You know exactly where my head was at. I sat back in my chair, listening to the HVAC hum in my little apartment. No fancy farewell speech. No cardboard box of personal items. Just me, and the knowledge that this wasn't over. Because while they were busy firing me to save money, they'd also fired their compliance plan. I didn't go in the next day. Of course I didn't. I was released effective immediately, per the HR letter. No exit interview scheduled. No transition calls. No questions about the audits I'd left pending. They just assumed I'd sign and disappear. I opened my inbox around 8 a.m. anyway. Old habit. Watching the red notification bubble felt like checking for a pulse. 2 new emails from HR. Clayton, reminder your separation paperwork is pending. Please confirm your intention to sign the attached agreement to finalize your transition. They were trying to keep it tight. No drama. No openings for me to raise issues. Just sign and vanish. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I opened my private notes again. Section. Known compliance dependencies. Vendor indemnity schedules. OSHA process safety variance renewal. Expiring Q2. Training logs for new regulations. Effective January. Incident investigation files with pending closure notes. These weren't confidential trade secrets. They were the inconvenient truths of running any business that played with hazardous materials and complex contractors. And they weren't in any SaaS transition plan. I closed the file, not because I didn't care, but because I finally accepted it wasn't my problem anymore. That was the thing no one warned you about when you did this job too well. You became the only one who understood what had to be done. And the moment you left, it all risked falling apart. Not because you sabotaged it, but because you didn't save them anymore. Around 10 a.m., Gary tried again. Clayton, do you have any notes on the contractor safety certifications? We're being asked for them by the PM team. It was almost funny. Polite, professional, desperate. I typed, deleted, typed again, finally sent. Gary, as stated, I no longer have access or authority. Please refer to the approved contractor SOP on the server. Regards, Clayton. Polite, non committal, useless. I knew that SOP hadn't been touched in months, because I was the one who touched it, updated it, trained it. They could replace my salary, but they couldn't replace what I knew. I spent the rest of the morning reviewing the HR document, line by line. Clause 14. B. Employee waives all claims of retaliation related to regulatory reporting. Employee agrees not to pursue any complaint with OSHA or other regulatory body. It was elegant. Total corporate risk containment, but only if I signed. And they really needed me to sign, because if I didn't, there'd be an asterisk on their file, a question in HR's audit logs, an unclosed loop in their termination records, something that could trigger curiosity from a regulator. My phone buzzed. Another email. HR. We want to ensure you understand the importance of timely signature to avoid disruption to your benefits continuation. There it was. Not a threat, but a subtle push. Sign now, or risk losing what you have left. I took a screenshot, saved it in a personal archive. Date, time, message body, symbolic objects, a small insurance policy, just in case. I scrolled through my sent mail folder, saw my own words staring back. As discussed, my role is being eliminated immediately per the transition plan. Please refer to the vendor SOP. It was the most professional way I could say, I won't save you anymore. And that's when it hit me. They weren't scared of me making a scene. They were scared of me doing nothing, because a man who refuses to help can't be accused of sabotage. He's just absent. And for a system built entirely on human vigilance, absence is the most dangerous failure mode. That was my entire revenge plan. Do nothing. Say nothing. Fix nothing. Let them discover the cost of firing the one person who cared enough to remember what needed remembering. If you've ever been in a role like that, the quiet fix-it person, no one notices until you're gone. You understand why I didn't burn the place down on the way out. I didn't have to. They'd do it themselves. I closed my laptop, went for a walk. The first workday in years I hadn't had a single meeting or call. Cold air in my lungs. The smell of wet asphalt. No HR rep watching me pack a cardboard box. Just me. Free. I didn't hear anything for 2 days. No more HR emails. No more gentle reminders about signing the waiver. No more last-minute requests from Gary for my notes. Just silence. It was the kind of quiet that always made me nervous. Because in compliance, silence isn't peace. It's the space where problems breed. By the third day, I got a call. I let it go to voicemail first. Watched the transcript scroll across my screen. Hey, Clayton. It's Gary. Just checking in. If you get a minute, could you call me back? We have a few questions about the variance renewal timeline and, there's some urgency. Appreciate it. Urgency. Now there was urgency. I listened to the message twice. He didn't say it outright, but I could read between the lines. The deadline for our OSHA variance renewal wasn't just a date on a calendar. It was a commitment we'd negotiated after our last citation. One they'd promised to maintain updated logs for. One I'd been managing because no one else wanted to deal with the paperwork, the calls, the inspections. If they missed that deadline, the variance lapsed, meaning they'd lose permission to run those processes as they were, meaning production stopped until they could prove safe compliance again. I didn't call him back. Around noon, I got an email instead. Clayton, we know you're reviewing the separation agreement, but this is time sensitive. We need your notes or confirmation on the variance schedule. It's critical for operations. I stared at it. Critical for operations. That was the first honest thing they'd said in weeks. I scrolled down. Read their signature block with the company logo. I used to feel proud seeing that. Now it was just another brand that didn't value what actually kept them legal. I closed the email without replying. I didn't ignore them out of spite. Not exactly. It was the principal. They had fired the role. They wanted the cost savings. They wanted me gone. They didn't get to have the cheap version of me on call for free afterward. That was the whole point of their strategy. Fire the person, buy the software, keep the knowledge for free. But they didn't realize knowledge isn't copy-paste. It doesn't live on SharePoint. It lives in the judgment of the person who knows when a form isn't enough. At 4 p.m., another email. This one had HR CC'd. Clayton, we are formally requesting you to provide any and all relevant materials that could prevent regulatory compliance lapses. Failure to do so may be seen as non-cooperation with transition obligations. I read that line carefully. May be seen as non-cooperation. I actually laughed. Out loud. Non-cooperation with what, exactly? They terminated me effective immediately. Eliminated my role. Cut off my access. Declared me redundant. And now they wanted to redefine redundant as still on the hook for free consulting. I took my time drafting a reply. HR and Gary. As my role was eliminated effective immediately, I have no further responsibility for internal compliance records or processes. As previously stated, I no longer have access to those materials. Please direct operational questions to the vendor contracted for compliance transition. Regards, Clayton Ward. Send. That was it. My last word, because I understood what was happening on their end. Someone had realized the software vendor didn't have our variance documentation. Someone had asked for proof of contractor indemnity renewals. Someone had noticed the upcoming audit date on the master calendar and panicked. And with me gone, no one knew how to answer those questions. It wasn't sabotage. It was absence. If you've ever been in that position, holding back from replying because you know anything you say will be used as a crutch. You'll understand why I didn't want to help them even a little. Because partial help is worse than silence. It gives them hope. Lets them delay solving the problem for real. That's why I went quiet. Cold. Professional. Untouchable. They wanted me gone. They could have that. Completely. That night, I opened my personal binder one more time. Not to share. Just to see it. Each tab. Each annotated clause. OSHA 1910.119 highlighted in yellow. The handwritten note about the inspector's last suggestion. Push for contractor retraining next cycle. Inspector expects it. They'd never see that. Because they didn't want to pay the person who remembered it. I closed it. Locked it in my safe. Saturday back with my coffee. By the end of that week, they'd stopped emailing me. No more polite HR reminders. No more desperate quick questions from Gary. Just silence. It was the kind of silence you could measure in tension. I knew what was happening. They were scrambling internally, trying to assemble what they thought I'd left behind, pulling old SOPs from the shared drive, realizing half of them were outdated or incomplete, realizing they didn't know which vendor indemnity certificates were about to expire, realizing they didn't even know what they didn't know. I'd seen this movie before. It always went the same way. They'd act calm in front of staff meetings, issue pep talk emails about smooth transitions and digital compliance automation. But in the back rooms, the real conversations were happening. Who actually has the variance logs? Did anyone find the signed checklist for process line 3? Can the software even spit out the OSHA clause mapping? They'd start blaming each other. Middle managers would blame the vendor. The vendor would point at the contract, fine print. HR would blame Gary. Gary would blame me. I didn't have to do anything to make that happen. That was the beauty of it. They engineered the collapse themselves when they decided they didn't need me. That Friday, I got a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't know well, but had worked with once on a joint safety audit. Clayton, heard about your exit. You free to talk? Noticed your old firm is posting for emergency compliance contract work. Emergency. That word made me pause. I clicked over to their company job board out of curiosity. There it was. Urgent. Contract compliance manager. Short term. Experience with OSHA variance renewals required. Immediate start preferred. I actually laughed. They'd literally created my own replacement ad. Emergency. Short term. Meaning they didn't want a new system. They wanted me, without admitting it. But they couldn't even write the post without showing the problem. They didn't say general compliance. They specified OSHA variance renewals, because that was the fire they were trying to put out. They had made a budget cut, but the audit calendar didn't care. That weekend, I got a text from an old vendor contact. Hey Clayton, sorry to hear. FYI, they asked me for our updated indemnity file but didn't know how to verify it. Sounded panicked. Panicked. That was the real cost savings. Trade, the known for the unknown. Fire the person who built the checks. Hope the vendor would hold their hand. They hadn't planned for the fact that the vendor trusted me, because I was the one who called at 7 p.m. to fix a typo in the indemnity form, who walked them through OSHA's required wording, who got them approved so our mutual audit would pass. Without me, vendors started getting worried, less cooperative, more cautious, because if my old company didn't know how to verify indemnity language, it meant risk for them too. That's what they didn't get. Compliance isn't just a document. It's a relationship, a promise, a memory. I didn't sabotage them. I didn't call any vendor to say, don't help them. I just didn't help them myself. And the difference between me and nothing was starting to show. They tried to patch it by hiring contractors, by asking vendors for help, by leaning on the software rep. But those people didn't know our audit history, didn't know where we'd cut corners 2 years ago, didn't know the OSHA inspector's personal preferences. I did, but I was gone, and they made sure I had no reason to come back. If you've ever been let go for being too expensive, and then watched them spend double on damage control, you know exactly how this felt. It wasn't satisfying in a gloating way. It was quiet, almost sad, because I tried to keep them safe, and they made sure I couldn't anymore. So if you're hearing this and you've ever felt like the only thing standing between barely legal and shut down, I get it. You're not overhead, you're insurance. And they never understand that until the claim comes due. If any of that sounds familiar, take a second and hit that subscribe button, because I'm going to walk you through exactly how this meltdown kept getting worse. The first real crack didn't show up on their website. It showed up in a regulator's inbox. They'd gone quiet with me, but they couldn't go quiet with OSHA. I didn't tip anyone off, didn't file a complaint, didn't even hint, but the inspector assigned to their variance renewal did his job. He asked questions, requested documents, expected the right signatures, and there was no one left who knew how to answer. I heard about it the usual way. Texts, vendor calls, industry gossip. They had an unannounced site visit, scrambled for hours before letting them in. Not surprising. We had a protocol I wrote myself. Who greets the inspector? Where the last variance is stored? What training log to produce? They deleted my role without even printing that protocol. So they tried to improvise. Always the fatal mistake. You can't fake a compliance system under inspection. I heard they handed over last year's variance schedule, showed an expired indemnity letter. Vendor rep refused to back them because they sounded confused on the call. That's how the inspector decided they needed additional documentation, which is polite language for, we're going to keep digging until you prove you're safe or prove you're not. I didn't celebrate. That's not what this is about. I didn't want the plant shut down, didn't want people to get hurt, but I did want them to take it seriously, to fund it, to respect it. When you've spent 12 years making sure dangerous systems don't blow up or poison someone, you don't root for failure. You just recognize when it's inevitable. That same week, I got another LinkedIn message. This time just a line or two. Clayton, any chance you'd consult? We have questions about your old training plan. Happy to pay for your time. It was almost respectful. Almost. But too late. Because I wasn't going to help them for them. Not anymore. I didn't block him. I just didn't answer. Silence was my answer. Around that time, I got a vendor text I'll never forget. FYI, your old company wants updated indemnity letters, but refuses to sign our new liability waiver. Says they don't have approval authority. That told me everything. They didn't even know who had signing power anymore, because I'd owned that process. Not for power, but because no one else wanted to do it right. I read that text twice. I could see the dominoes falling, because that's how supply chains collapse. Not with a bang, but with polite refusals. A dozen, we're reviewing terms emails. They were losing trust everywhere. Regulators, vendors, their own staff, all at once. I didn't sabotage them. I just stopped being the one who accidentally prevented sabotage. If you've ever felt like the last defense between your company and disaster, you know exactly what this moment feels like. I didn't know the exact moment they got the fine, but I knew the moment they realized they deserved it. It was the text I got at 11 p.m. from a former coworker. OSHA tagged us. Gary's losing it. HR's blaming vendor renewals. Total meltdown. I read it twice. Didn't answer. What was there to say? They'd spent months pretending compliance was overhead. Now they were discovering it was insurance. It wasn't even the money that hurt them. Not really. 5-figure fines sting. But they don't kill. It was what the fine meant. Because once you get cited, your inspections double. Your reports get picked apart. Your variance approvals move from formality to cross-examination. No benefit of the doubt. You stop being a reliable operator. You become a red flag. And vendors? They hear about it before the ink's dry. Because vendors share risk. They don't want to indemnify a company OSHA's watching. A few even reached out to me. Not to gossip. To ask who they could even talk to there. Clayton. They're asking for updated indemnity forms but won't sign our liability clauses. It's like they don't know who has approval authority. That told me everything. They hadn't replaced my knowledge. They deleted it. They didn't even know who had signing power anymore. Because I'd been the one who owned that process. Not for glory. Just because someone had to. Now it was gone. HR tried to fix it with money. Rumor was they reopened the budget they cut. Emergency consultants. Contractors billing twice my salary to fix half the problem. But you can't buy memory overnight. You can't onboard trust in a week. You can't repair vendor relationships with panic emails. I wasn't watching gleefully. That's not how this works. I didn't want people to lose jobs or get hurt. But I did want them to understand why it cost money, why I fought them on efficiency. Because compliance isn't an expense line you trim. It's the price of not ending up on the front page for all the wrong reasons. I didn't send any warning, didn't file a complaint, didn't sabotage a thing. I just walked away and let them discover what I'd been doing in the dark. If you've ever been the last barrier between your company and disaster, if you've ever been told you were too expensive, too cautious, too slow, you know exactly what this felt like. It didn't stay hidden long. That's the thing about OSHA fines. They don't need press releases. They're public by design. Word spread fast. Vendors talk. Auditors talk. Employees talk. Especially the ones thinking about leaving. I didn't have to say a word. Didn't leak anything. Didn't celebrate. I just watched it move. First, it showed up as an industry bulletin. Generic. Dry. Notice. Updated OSHA enforcement priorities after recent citation. No company name in bold. But everyone in our circle knew. Then there were the LinkedIn posts. No one tagging them. Just polite, professional reminders. Make sure your variance renewals are current. Don't let compliance become a last-minute scramble. I read them all. Didn't react. Didn't like or comment. It wasn't satisfaction. It was gravity. Consequences falling the way they had to. A vendor I used to work with messaged me. Clayton, anyone left there who knows what the hell they're doing? They're asking us to renew indemnity forms but don't know how to sign their own liability clauses. I didn't answer. Didn't even type a draft. Because there was nothing to say. They'd built this themselves. Their leadership didn't believe in paying for memory. Didn't see the cost of trust until they couldn't buy it back. Another message came later from an old coworker. One line. They're asking if you'd come back. I read it twice. Leaned back in my chair. Exhaled. It wasn't satisfying. It was heavy. Because I knew what it really meant. They finally realized they needed someone who remembered. But they didn't respect it until it cost them. I thought about all the times I tried to warn them. Tried to budget for training. Tried to explain why we couldn't just automate everything. Got told I was the roadblock. The expensive one. The overhead. And now they were paying contractors 3 times my salary to clean it up. I didn't want them to fail. I just wouldn't save them anymore. Silence was my answer. If you've ever been the person in the meeting asking, what if this goes wrong? Well, everyone rolled their eyes. You know exactly what this moment feels like. It wasn't an email this time. It was an actual call. Gary's voice on the other end. Flat. Exhausted. No fake cheer. Clayton, we need to talk. He didn't bother with small talk. Didn't even pretend. I didn't say anything. I let the silence do the work. He sighed. Shuffled papers. I could hear the tension in the way he exhaled. We're in trouble. OSHA wants another inspection. The vendor contracts are expiring. We can't get anyone to sign off on the indemnity waivers. His voice cracked on the last one. Not anger, just fatigue. The sound of someone realizing he'd ignored every warning sign until they all went off at once. Look, I know things ended badly, but the board wants to know what it would take to get you back. He actually said it like that. What it would take. Like I was the problem. Like I just hadn't been willing to negotiate last time. I remembered sitting in the HR conference room. Clause 14. B in bold letters on the separation form. Redundant. Overhead? They didn't want me back then. They wanted me gone. Because I said no. Because I wouldn't sign off on shortcuts. Now they wanted me to fix it. At any price. Because it was hurting them. I let the silence stretch so long he tried to fill it. We're willing to be flexible. The board says name your number. That was the part that got me. Because it meant they finally believed me. But they hadn't learned a thing about respecting it. They didn't want compliance. They wanted a cleanup crew. Someone to sign off on the mess and make it go away. I thought about all the nights I stayed late rewriting training logs, calling vendors to explain policy changes, building the waiver database from scratch, all unpaid, unrecognized, unappreciated, until it failed without me. I didn't hate them. I just didn't trust them. Not to do it right, not to value it for more than damage control. So I finally spoke. Cold, level, Gary, you don't need me. You need a compliance program you're willing to pay for. He didn't argue. Didn't even try. He just listened. You don't need a consultant. You need a culture change. Because you can't outsource memory. Silence. He didn't even sigh this time. Like he knew I was right. Clayton, the board is desperate. They'll pay whatever. I shook my head even though he couldn't see. Because that was the problem. They thought it was about money. You'll just fire me again next time a consultant says I'm too expensive. He didn't deny it. Couldn't. So I ended it. Good luck, Gary. You're going to need it. And I hung up. I set the phone down on the table. Let the quiet fill the room. Listened to the old refrigerator humming. It didn't feel like triumph. Just release. I wasn't carrying their risk anymore. If you've ever had someone who fired you beg you to come back when the mess you warned them about finally hit, you know how heavy that feels. After I hung up on Gary, I didn't move for a while. I just sat there, listening to the old hum of my fridge, letting it settle. Because even though I didn't want to go back, hearing them ask was its own reckoning. Proof they knew. Proof they finally understood what they'd lost. But it wasn't enough. Because I didn't want to fix it for them anymore. Didn't want to hold their risk for them. Didn't want to be the firewall they never funded. They hadn't respected the work. They'd just expected it. Invisible. Until it failed. The next morning, there was another message waiting. But this one was different. Not a plea. Not an apology. Not a negotiation. It was an introduction. From someone I hadn't worked with directly, but who'd seen what I'd done. He was compliance director at a mid-sized firm. One of our old vendors' other clients. Clayton, heard you're free. We're not looking for a quick fix. Our board is serious about overhauling compliance after some close calls. We want someone who's actually seen it go wrong. That last line hit me. Seen it go wrong. They weren't looking for a checkbox artist. They wanted a realist. Someone with scars. We set up a call. I expected the same old dance. Budget hedging. Awkward questions about rates. Subtle ways to get it cheap. But they didn't start with money. They asked me what I believed. How do you see compliance working best? I was quiet for a second, because no one had asked me that in years. Then I told them. Plain, cold, honest. It works when leadership believes it matters. When they don't treat it as insurance to cancel. When you know your vendors well enough to call them at 10 p.m. if you have to and they answer. When your team knows the training logs aren't for OSHA, they're for keeping people alive. They didn't interrupt. Didn't argue. Didn't say it was too expensive. They just said, that's what we want. They didn't offer me a job on that call. They offered me trust. A role with budget. Staff I could train. Authority to fix it for real. A direct line to the board. Not because they wanted cheap compliance, but because they wanted real compliance. They wanted my fear. My caution. My memory of every close call. Because they understood that was what they were buying. That's why I said yes. Not because they offered more money, but because they offered respect. If you've ever left a place that punished you for caring too much, and found somewhere that wanted you because of it, you'll know exactly why I said yes. It's been over a year now. Since they fired me. Since they called me overhead. Since they said my caution was too expensive. They never figured out a number that would make me say yes. Because there wasn't one. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I didn't want to go back to being the safety net they refused to see. The human firewall they didn't want to pay for. They didn't respect the work. They just expected it. I heard from mutual contacts that they finally filled my old role. Hired an outside contractor, billed them double what they paid me, did half the work. They dropped the HR waiver they kept sending me because they couldn't risk me talking. Not when OSHA fines were searchable. Not when vendors were gossiping about liability clauses. Meanwhile, the board had to approve an emergency compliance budget. It wasn't even enough. They couldn't buy memory. They couldn't buy trust back. Vendors waited. Auditors circled. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't want anyone hurt. Didn't want them to fail. But I did want them to learn. The new place? It's different. Better. Not perfect. But honest. They know what they're paying for. Not my signature on a waiver. Not my willingness to fudge a log. They're paying for my worry. My memory. My fear. They don't flinch when I say no. They don't slash training hours because it's non-billable. They don't treat compliance as insurance they hope to cancel. They see it for what it is. The cost of not being the headline. The cost of not ending up on the front page for all the wrong reasons. When I joined, I told them how I work. Documented. Clear. Accountable. No shortcuts. They said, that's what we want. My first week, I met with vendors. Told them we'd pay on time. Listen. Respect the terms. No last-minute surprises. And you know what? They responded in kind. Because trust is reciprocal. And it's cheaper in the long run. We passed our first surprise inspection without panic. Not because we gamed the system, but because we were ready. It wasn't dramatic. It was professional, which is exactly what it should be. If you've ever been the last line of defense in a place that refused to see the value of what you do, if you've ever been pushed out because you cared too much about doing it right, this story is for you. Because you're not wrong. You're not overcautious. You're necessary. You're the reason things don't fall apart when no one's watching. The best revenge was leaving. Taking my memory, my standards, my fear, and giving them to people who actually wanted them. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't leak documents. I didn't burn bridges. I just walked away and let them show everyone who they really were without me. If you've stayed this far, thanks for listening. If this sounded familiar, you're not alone. And if you want to hear more stories about doing the work right, no matter who notices, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for caring enough to want it done right.